On March 15, 1944, at Pratt Army Airfield in Kansas, a terrifying scene unfolded as Captain Robert Morgan witnessed fierce flames erupting from the No. 3 engine of his B-29 Superfortress. The powerful Wright R-3350 engine, a marvel of American engineering boasting 2,200 horsepower, was self-immolating, reaching scorching temperatures of 600 degrees air. Dense black smoke billowed from the engine cowling as ground crews valiantly rushed towards the imperiled aircraft, clutching fire extinguishers, in a desperate attempt to quell the inferno. This incident marked the fourth engine fire observed on that particular airfield within a single week, highlighting a dire and escalating crisis. Captain Morgan swiftly cut the fuel mixture and activated the fire suppression system, but to no avail. The extinguisher bottles, specifically engineered to inundate the engine compartment with carbon dioxide, proved utterly ineffective in reaching the core of the blaze. The fire, stubbornly burning within the rear cylinders, remained shielded behind intricate baffles and cooling fins, rendering the extinguishing agent incapable of penetrating its source. "Everybody out!" Morgan vociferated, his voice laced with urgency. His crew, honed by countless practice drills, evacuated the aircraft with remarkable speed, completing the procedure in a mere 45 seconds through sheer muscle memory. By the time the fire trucks finally arrived, the majestic $600,000 bomber was irrevocably lost, its main wing spar having succumbed to the intense heat and melted away. The entire aircraft was destined for the scrap heap, a stark testament to the destructive power of the fire. This particular incident was made even more profoundly unsettling by the fact that it did not occur during combat operations. This was Kansas, a locale far removed from the theater of war, and the flight was merely a training exercise. The B-29 had not even ventured beyond American airspace. Yet such catastrophic events were occurring with alarming frequency across the nation. At Smoky Hill Army Airfield, another B-29 was consumed by fire on the runway. Concurrently, at Walker Field in Kansas, 2 additional superfortresses ignited during routine engine run-ups. The situation escalated to tragedy at Great Bend, where a superfortress violently exploded during takeoff, claiming the lives of all 11 crew members before the aircraft could even achieve airborne status. The statistical data painted a catastrophic picture out of the initial 175 B-29s delivered to the Army Air Forces. A staggering 16 had been completely incinerated, with another 47 suffering extensive engine fires. The B-29, America's most exorbitantly priced weapons program, surpassing even the cost of the Manhattan Project, was plagued by an engine failure rate of an alarming 35%. We are so glad you are staying with us. Please continue watching to the end of the video. We would be incredibly grateful for your like and subscription. Also, please take a moment to write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. General Henry Hap Arnold, the commanding general of the Army Air Forces, found himself confronting an unmitigated nightmare. He had personally assured President Roosevelt that B-29s would commence bombing operations over Japan by June 1944. However, at the current rate of attrition, the program appeared poised to claim more American air crews through training accidents than the Japanese military would ever manage to shoot down in actual combat. What remained entirely unknown, what no one could possibly have foreseen as Captain Morgan helplessly watched his bomber burn, was that the ultimate resolution to this profound crisis would not emanate from the distinguished team of elite engineers at Wright Aeronautical Corporation. nor would it originate from the brilliant design department at Boeing. It would not even emerge from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, where the nation's foremost aeronautical experts were diligently, yet futilely, striving to unravel the perplexing problem. The pivotal solution would, in fact, materialize from the unexpected quarter of a 38-year-old aircraft mechanic, a man whose formal education concluded at the 7th grade and who had dedicated 15 years prior to the war to installing residential plumbing systems in Cleveland, Ohio. His name was Antonio "Tony" Valador, and his seemingly preposterous notion concerning pipes was on the cusp of salvaging the entire B-29 program. The relentless march of time was an ever-present pressure. Japan was diligently fortifying its defenses, while American bombers continued to burn on domestic runways. Tony Valador was about to propose an idea so refreshingly simple, so disarmingly obvious, that the highly credentialed engineers would undoubtedly dismiss him with derisive laughter. The R-33350 duplex cyclone engine was conceived to be the apotheosis of radial engine design, an 18-cylinder behemoth arranged in 2 rows, generating an astounding 2,200 horsepower, theoretically capable of propelling the B-29 to speeds of 350 mph at an altitude of 30,000 feet. On paper, its specifications were truly magnificent. In practical application, however, it proved to be a veritable death trap. The fundamental issue revolved around heat, specifically the excessive thermal buildup in the engine's rear cylinders. Each R-3350 engine featured 9 cylinders in its front row and an identical 9 in the rear. The front cylinders benefited from an abundance of cooling air, a forceful rush of ram air coursing through the engine cowling at speeds approaching 200 mph. Conversely, the rear cylinders languished in the aerodynamic shadow of their forward counterparts, critically starved of sufficient airflow. During routine operation, temperatures within the rear cylinders soared to 550 degrees. Under demanding high-power climbs, such as those executed during takeoff, these temperatures would spike even further, reaching a perilous 650 degrees. The aluminum cylinder heads began to deform and warp at a mere 500 degrees. Exhaust valves experienced catastrophic failure at 575 degrees, and by the time temperatures hit 600 degrees, an entire cylinder could seize, causing its piston to abruptly halt while the crankshaft relentlessly continued its rotation at 2,800 RPM. When such an event transpired, connecting rods would inevitably snap, pistons would violently rupture cylinder walls, and superheated oil would spray across intensely hot metal surfaces. The magnesium alloy engine cases would then ignite, burning at an infernal 5,600 degrees, a temperature sufficiently extreme to melt through the robust aluminum wing spar in a mere 90 seconds. The B-29's integrated fire suppression system was rendered utterly impotent, as the conflagration raged deep within the engine, beyond the reach of any extinguishing agent. Boeing's engineers exhaustively pursued every conceivable remedy. They augmented the dimensions of the cooling air intake, yet this modification proved ineffectual. The rear cylinders persisted in overheating. They subsequently installed larger oil coolers, which yielded only a marginal improvement, insufficient to resolve the core problem. They then embarked on a redesign of the cowl flaps, the adjustable panels positioned at the rear of the engine cowling that regulated cooling airflow. However, the new design generated such a significant amount of aerodynamic drag that pilots found themselves unable to fully open the flaps during takeoff without sacrificing critical airspeed. Wright Aeronautical dispatched a contingent of their most accomplished engineers to conduct an investigation. Their findings revealed that the cylinder baffles, thin sheets of aluminum meticulously designed to channel cooling air over the cylinder heads, possessed inadequate clearance. A paltry half-inch of space separated the baffles from the cylinder cooling fins, a gap too narrow to permit efficient airflow. The solution, it seemed, was self-evident: enlarge the clearance, re-engineer the baffles, and thereby afford the air ample room to circulate. However, a formidable obstacle loomed. The entire engine cowling had been meticulously designed around the existing baffle configuration. Modifying the baffles would necessitate a complete overhaul of the cowling. Altering the cowling in turn would mandate changes to the wing structure, and redesigning the wing structure would ultimately entail a comprehensive redesign of the entire aircraft. Boeing's conservative estimate projected that implementing such sweeping changes across the production line would consume 18 months and incur a staggering cost of $50 million. General Arnold, however, did not possess the luxury of 18 months, nor even 18 weeks. The inaugural B-29 combat missions were irrevocably scheduled for June 5, 1944, a mere 12 weeks away. The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the esteemed precursor to NASA, became actively involved in the crisis. In June 1944, they transported a B-29 to their Advanced Aircraft Engine Research Laboratory situated in Cleveland, Ohio. Teams of dedicated engineers subjected the engines to rigorous testing within their colossal altitude wind tunnel, meticulously simulating flight conditions at an altitude of 30,000 feet. The engineers unequivocally confirmed what was already widely acknowledged: insufficient airflow to the rear cylinders. Yet, the expert consensus that emerged was grim. The problem was fundamentally insoluble without a complete redesign of the engine itself. The R-3350 was simply too powerful, generating an insurmountable amount of heat within an inherently constrained package. The prevailing sentiment was that the laws of thermodynamics are against us. By September 1944, the situation had escalated to one of utter desperation. A staggering 414 B-29s would ultimately be lost during the tumultuous years of World War II. A mere 147 of these losses would be attributed to direct enemy action. The remaining 267, representing nearly two-thirds of the total, would be tragically lost to engine fires and mechanical failures. Two-thirds of these formidable bombers were succumbing to the very engines designed to power them. The 20th Air Force was losing bombers at a rate that outpaced Boeing's production capabilities. Air crews were gripped by palpable terror, with pilots morbidly dubbing the B-29 the flying funeral pyre. Some air crews, driven by fear, actively sought transfers to B-17s and B-24s, older, slower, and less capable aircraft, simply because those planes, at the very least, did not spontaneously ignite over friendly territory. At Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, at the NACA laboratory in Cleveland, at Boeing's sprawling plant in Wichita, everywhere the brightest aviation minds in America were relentlessly grappling with this problem, the answer remained consistently the same: there is no solution, not without starting over. What these brilliant minds failed to comprehend was that in a humble maintenance hangar at Pratt Army Airfield, a mechanic who had once installed copper pipes in the basements of Cleveland was intently scrutinizing an R-3350 engine and contemplating the principles of water pressure. Antonio "Tony" Valador was far from anyone's preconceived notion of an aircraft engineer. Born in 1906 within Cleveland's vibrant Little Italy neighborhood, Tony had curtailed his formal education at the tender age of 14 to contribute to the financial support of his family. His father operated a modest plumbing business, primarily undertaking residential work, installing sinks, repairing toilets, and meticulously routing water lines through antiquated houses where existing pipes often resisted cooperation with the structural walls. Tony acquired his trade through arduous practical experience, enduring frozen knuckles, painstakingly crawling through damp basements, and ingeniously devising methods to guide pipes through seemingly impossible spaces. By the age of 20, he had established himself as one of Cleveland's most proficient troubleshooters. When water refused to flow, when pressure inexplicably diminished between floors, or when a heating system developed perplexing cold spots, Tony was invariably the individual summoned to diagnose and rectify the issue. The fundamental secret, Tony had learned, resided in a profound understanding of flow dynamics. Water, he understood, paid no heed to architectural blueprints. It invariably pursued the path of least resistance. If one desired to direct water to a specific location, the strategy was not to force it, but rather to skillfully guide it. The objective was to create a pathway where flowing was inherently easier than not flowing. When the war erupted in 1941, Tony was 35 years old, too advanced in years for combat duty, yet sufficiently youthful for war-related work. He applied to Curtiss Wright, believing that his extensive experience with pipes and fluid flow might be transferable to the intricacies of aircraft manufacturing. He was subsequently assigned to engine maintenance at Pratt Army Airfield. Tony had never before worked on aircraft. His entire knowledge of engines stemmed from a concise 3-week training course. Nevertheless, he possessed an innate understanding of pipes. He understood flow, and when he observed the R-3350 engine, truly examining it with the discerning eye of a plumber confronting a problematic water system, he perceived something that the highly educated engineers had entirely overlooked. In a pivotal moment, a discerning individual observed a critical detail that had eluded the collective expertise of the engineering team. It was the month of September in 1944 when Tony, engaged in his nocturnal duties, was meticulously performing routine maintenance on the third engine of a B-29 Superfortress. This particular aircraft had experienced an alarming overheat warning during a recent training flight, prompting the pilot to preemptively shut down the engine to avert a potential conflagration. Tony's primary responsibility was to conduct a thorough inspection for any resultant damage. Upon carefully removing the cowling panels, he was confronted with the sight of the rear cylinders, visibly blackened and showing distinct signs of heat stress. The discolored cooling fins provided an unmistakable indication of prolonged exposure to elevated temperatures. Tony meticulously traced the intended pathway of the cooling air. It was designed to enter through the forward intake of the cowling, flow over the front cylinders, and theoretically proceed between the cylinder rows to effectively cool the rear cylinders. However, as Tony scrutinized the actual physical configuration, a significant realization dawned upon him. The air was not circulating as intended. Instead, it was stagnating. The initial passage over the front cylinders caused the incoming air to heat up to a scorching 300 degrees Fahrenheit. This superheated air then attempted to move rearward But, critically, there was no adequate exit path. Consequently, the air became trapped within the confines of the cylinder rows, progressively intensifying in temperature until it was, paradoxically, contributing to the heating of the rear cylinders rather than facilitating their cooling. This predicament bore a striking resemblance to a previous challenge Tony had encountered when tasked with repairing the third-floor radiators in an apartment building situated on Euclid Avenue. In that instance, the hot water preferentially followed the path of least resistance, flowing directly to the second floor and failing to reach the third floor due to an insufficient pressure differential to propel it upwards. The resolution to that problem had been straightforward. Tony had simply installed a small bypass pipe, effectively rerouting a portion of the water flow to where it was critically needed. Standing within the vast expanse of the maintenance hangar, his gaze fixed upon a colossal aircraft engine, valued at $4 million, Tony pondered, what if I apply the same principle here? What if, instead of struggling to force cooling air directly through the engine's intricate internal passages, I'd devise a method to route it around? He swiftly committed his nascent idea to the back of a maintenance log, sketching out a conceptual design, small pipes, a system of ducts, a bypass mechanism designed to redirect cooling air directly to the rear cylinders. This innovative approach would establish a dedicated cooling pathway, entirely independent of the airflow between the cylinder rows. The concept was disarmingly simple, almost to the point of appearing rudimentary, which was precisely why Tony anticipated it would be met with scorn by the established engineers. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. Your like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Please share in the comments where you are from and your thoughts on the video's topic. Tony dedicated the subsequent 3 nights to the clandestine construction of his prototype. He understood implicitly that he could not navigate the official channels, requesting parts, seeking engineering approval, because he foresaw the inevitable outcome. The engineers, with their advanced degrees and specialized training, would undoubtedly dismiss his 7th-grade education and his background as a plumber, effectively laughing him out of any official discussion. Consequently, Tony resorted to ingenuity and improvisation. He resourceful, scavenged aluminum tubing from the wreckage of a damaged B-29, an aircraft awaiting salvage. He secured a cutting torch from the welding shop, borrowing it without official requisition. Employing tin snips, he meticulously modified the existing cylinder baffles, creating new apertures. He then fabricated small aluminum ducts, essentially custom-made pipes designed to channel cooling air around the front cylinders and directly to the rear. These ducts were undeniably crude, visibly hand-formed, and held together with an assortment of sheet metal screws and high-temperature sealant. Their appearance unmistakably suggested the handiwork of a plumber, cobbled together in a basement workshop, which was, in essence, precisely what they were. Nevertheless, the fundamental principle underpinning his design was undeniably sound. Rather than relying on the uncertain hope that air would naturally flow rearward through a complex and obstructive maze of internal engine components, Tony's system of ducts actively forced the air along a specifically designated path. It was an application of the identical principle employed in a water bypass line, the creation of a low-resistance conduit directly to the point where fluid flow was most urgently required. On the evening of October 3, 1944, Tony successfully completed the installation. He had modified the right inboard engine of B-29 serial number 422444605, a training aircraft that was already slated for an engine test run the following morning. He maintained complete silence regarding his unauthorized intervention. He simply signed off on the maintenance report, stating unequivocally, "Cooling system inspection complete. Engine cleared for test." The next morning, Captain James Wheeler was assigned the task of performing the engine run-up. Adhering to standard operating procedures, he was to cycle the engine through various power settings, meticulously monitoring temperatures and scrutinizing for any anomalies. Wheeler advanced the throttle. The R-3350 engine roared to life, spooling up to its full power output, a formidable 2,800 RPM, generating an impressive 2,200 horsepower. The cacophony was deafening, and the airframe vibrated intensely. Yet, the rear cylinder temperature gauge, which typically ascended rapidly to 550 degrees Fahrenheit within a mere 90 seconds, steadfastly registered a consistent 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Wheeler initially suspected a malfunction with the gauge itself. He continued the test for an extended duration of 5 minutes at full power, a period longer than normal, and indeed longer than considered safe if an actual problem existed. The rear cylinder temperature remained at 430 degrees Fahrenheit. Intriguingly, the front cylinders registered 410 degrees Fahrenheit. The rear cylinders were, astonishingly, operating at a cooler temperature than the front. Wheeler promptly shut down the engine and immediately reported his perplexing findings to the engineering officer. Something is clearly amiss with engine number 3. The temperature readings are utterly impossible. The gauge must be faulty. A maintenance crew was dispatched to investigate, and it was during this investigation that Tony's ingenious modification was ultimately discovered. Upon witnessing the crudely hand-fabricated aluminum ducts, the engineering officer erupted in a furious outburst. Who authorized this? Who dared to perform an unauthorized modification to a combat aircraft engine? This egregious act constitutes a court-martial offense. Tony was swiftly removed from the flight line and brought before Major Donald Peterson, the chief of aircraft maintenance. "Did you modify that engine without proper authorization?" Major Peterson demanded. "Yes, sir," Tony responded directly. "Do you comprehend the gravity of your actions, son? You could potentially face criminal charges for making unauthorized modifications to military aircraft." "Sir," Tony countered, "the rear cylinders operated 60 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. I believe I have discovered a viable solution to the persistent overheating problem." Peterson stared at him incredulously. "You believe you have a solution, son? The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, has 50 highly qualified engineers dedicated to solving this very problem. Wright Aeronautical has committed their entire design team to it. Boeing has—" "With all due respect, sir," Tony interjected, "they are all overthinking the issue. It is fundamentally a plumbing problem. The air requires a dedicated flow path. I simply provided one." "You are a mechanic," Peterson asserted. "You lack the necessary qualifications to—" "I am a plumber, sir," Tony corrected him. "And in plumbing, when fluid fails to flow where it is needed, one adds a bypass. That is precisely what I have done." Major Peterson meticulously reviewed the temperature logs from the test run. A reduction of 60 degrees Fahrenheit, sustained full power operation with no discernible temperature rise. "That is utterly impossible," Peterson declared. "Permission to conduct another test, sir," Tony requested. "Allow me to demonstrate that it is, in fact, not impossible." On October 5, 1944, at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, Major Peterson, despite his initial skepticism regarding Tony's modification, could not overlook the compelling temperature data. He promptly forwarded the test results to Wright Field with a concise accompanying note: "Mechanic-modified R3350 cooling system. Achieved 60 degrees Fahrenheit temperature reduction. Recommend immediate evaluation." 2 days later, Tony found himself aboard a C-47 transport aircraft, en route to Dayton, his hand-built aluminum ducts carefully stowed in a canvas bag, much like a plumber carrying his essential tools to a job site. Upon his arrival at Wright Field, he was escorted to a conference room, where a formidable assembly of 12 engineers from Wright, Aeronautical, Boeing, NACA, and the Army Air Forces awaited him. They had, of course, heard whispers of the plumber's modification, and their collective demeanor indicated a distinct lack of impressiveness. Colonel Curtis E. LeMay, the formidable commander of the B-29 program in the Pacific Theater, happened to be visiting Wright Field and decided to attend the meeting. LeMay was renowned for his utter intolerance of bureaucratic inertia and inefficiency. His paramount concern was the immediate need for B-29s that would not spontaneously combust. He was entirely indifferent to the identity of the individual who ultimately solved the problem. Dr. Harrison Evans, the chief aeronautical engineer from Wright Aeronautical, initiated the proceedings. "Sergeant Valador," he began, "we have thoroughly reviewed your temperature data. While the results are certainly interesting, we harbor significant concerns regarding your overall approach." "What specific concerns do you have, sir?" Tony inquired. "For starters," Dr. Evans explained, "you have inadvertently created turbulent flow paths that fundamentally violate established principles of aerodynamic cooling design. According to our calculations, the ducts you have installed actually diminish the total cooling airflow by approximately 8%. But the rear cylinders are running cooler," Tony countered. It's most likely a measurement error," Dr. Evans posited. "The thermocouples may have been improperly positioned following your modification." Tony then produced a second set of temperature logs. "I conducted 3 additional tests, sir," he stated. Using different thermocouples, the results were consistently the same. The rear cylinders consistently registered temperatures between 50 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the baseline. A Boeing engineer then spoke up. "Even assuming your data is accurate, your modification is entirely impractical for mass production. Those hand-fabricated ducts would necessitate custom manufacturing processes. We simply cannot tool up for something of this nature across the entire fleet of aircraft." "Why not?" Tony questioned. "They are merely aluminum tubes. Any competent sheet metal shop can fabricate them." "Because they are not properly engineered," the engineer retorted. "There has been no stress analysis, no vibration testing, no long-term durability assessment conducted." "They are cooling ducts," Tony calmly explained, "not load-bearing structures." The room erupted in a chorus of objections. "You simply do not grasp the inherent complexity of these systems. These engines alone cost $35,000 each. We cannot simply permit mechanics to begin modifying engines based on mere hunches. This is precisely the kind of reckless cowboy engineering that ultimately leads to tragic fatalities." At this juncture, Colonel LeMay rose to his feet. An immediate hush fell over the room. "Gentlemen, shut up," LeMay commanded. He then turned his gaze towards Tony. "Sergeant, I have B-29s literally burning up on Saipan. I have flight crews who are refusing to fly because they are more terrified of their own engines than they are of Japanese fighter planes. Now you are telling me that you can resolve this critical problem with some rudimentary aluminum tubes?" "Yes, sir," Tony affirmed. "And these so-called experts," LeMay continued, gesturing towards the assembled engineers, "are telling me that your solution cannot possibly work because it is not properly engineered. Is that a reasonably accurate summation?" The initial exchange confirmed a critical flaw. The system's inability to function effectively stemmed from inadequate engineering. This assertion was met with immediate agreement. Colonel LeMay then directed his attention to Dr. Evans, inquiring about the duration of Wright Aeronautical's engagement with the persistent cooling challenge. Dr. Evans responded, detailing that their efforts had commenced in early 1943, spanning a considerable period of approximately 20 months. Colonel LeMay reiterated the significant time frame, 20 months, before pressing for an account of the specific remedies Wright Aeronautical had put into practice. Dr. Evans explained their approach, which involved a series of gradual enhancements to the cylinder head's configuration, adjustments to the baffle clearances within predefined limits, and a fine-tuning of the cowl flap actuator's operational sequence. A pointed question followed, challenging the efficacy of these measures. "Has any of it worked?" A palpable silence filled the room, prompting LeMay to repeat his query with intensified urgency. Dr. Evans conceded that their endeavors had not yielded the desired level of success. Colonel LeMay then scrutinized the meticulously recorded temperature logs, his gaze fixed on the stark data. He pointedly highlighted Sergeant Valador's remarkable achievement, a significant 60-degree decrease in engine temperature, accomplished merely overnight in a maintenance hangar, utilizing salvaged aluminum tubing and discarded components. With a decisive gesture, he dropped the logs onto the conference table, his tone shifting to one of authoritative command. He declared a new course of action, the immediate adoption of Sergeant Valador's ingenious modification. This innovative solution was to be meticulously engineered, undergoing rigorous stress analysis, vibration testing, and any other necessary evaluations. The critical directive was clear. It must transition into full-scale production. Not within the languid pace of 20 months or even 20 weeks, but with an unprecedented urgency within a mere 20 days. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. A voice from the assembly protested vehemently, declaring the ambitious timeline impossible. Colonel LeMay, however, remained resolute, countering with an unyielding ultimatum. He underscored the critical strategic imperative. Within 30 days, he intended to deploy 500 B-29s for bombing missions over Japan, necessitating fully operational engines capable of enduring the grueling conditions of the Pacific theater without succumbing to overheating. He asserted that Sergeant Valador had already provided the definitive solution, leaving no room for further debate. It was now incumbent upon them to fulfill their professional obligations and execute the implementation without delay. A profound silence enveloped the room, a testament to the gravity of LeMay's directive. The colonel then pivoted to address Tony, the sergeant responsible for the breakthrough. He informed Tony that he would be retained at right field, assuming the crucial role of a technical consultant. His primary responsibility would be to provide expert guidance and detailed explanations regarding his groundbreaking modification to the assembled engineers, who would undoubtedly have numerous inquiries. Tony responded with a concise affirmation, acknowledging his new assignment. As Colonel LeMay moved toward the exit, he paused, offering a final, sagacious piece of advice to the sergeant. He cautioned Tony against allowing the engineers to unnecessarily elaborate or overcomplicate his elegant solution, emphasizing that frequently the most effective remedies are also the simplest. The narrative then shifts to October 15, 1944, at the Wright Field Testing Facility, where Tony's innovative modification was subjected to an unprecedented and rigorous evaluation, arguably the most exhaustive in the annals of aviation. The engineers at Wright Aeronautical meticulously deconstructed his rough, manually crafted ducts, engaging in a process of reverse engineering to understand their fundamental principles. From this detailed analysis, they meticulously produced precise technical drawings. Furthermore, the engineering team executed computational fluid dynamics analyses, which, while basic by contemporary benchmarks, represented the pinnacle of technological sophistication for 1944. To ensure comprehensive data acquisition, they strategically placed calibrated thermocouples at 36 distinct points across the engine assembly. The testing regimen itself was exceptionally severe. The engine was compelled to operate at its maximum power output for an uninterrupted 2-hour period, a duration twice that typically sustained by a B-29 at peak performance during real-world missions. Every conceivable parameter, temperature, pressure, and vibration frequency, was painstakingly monitored. The revelations gleaned from these exhaustive trials astounded all observers. The comparative data dramatically illustrated the efficacy of the modification. For the unmodified R3350 engine, baseline measurements indicated an average front cylinder temperature of 410 degrees and a significantly higher average rear cylinder temperature of 565 degrees. The peak rear cylinder temperature soared to an alarming 667 degrees, leading to an exhaust valve failure time of merely 73 minutes under full power. In stark contrast, the modified R3350, equipped with Validor ducts, presented vastly improved figures. The front cylinder average temperature was 415 degrees, while the rear cylinder average temperature plummeted to a much safer 445 degrees. The peak rear cylinder temperature was reduced to 478 degrees, and critically, no exhaust valve failures were observed even after an extended 180 minutes of full power operation, demonstrating an extraordinary leap in durability and performance. These results revealed that the rear cylinders were operating a remarkable 120 degrees cooler than before. Furthermore, the previously substantial temperature disparity between the front and rear cylinders, which had stood at 175 degrees, was now drastically narrowed to a mere 30 degrees. Dr. Evans, a representative from Wright Aeronautical, meticulously recalculated the figures on 3 separate occasions, initially convinced that such a dramatic improvement must be attributable to some computational error. However, his repeated verifications confirmed the astounding accuracy of the data. Perplexed by the counterintuitive outcomes, Dr. Evans directly questioned Tony, seeking an explanation. How is this possible? The ducts actually reduce total cooling airflow by 8%. You're moving less air, but achieving better cooling. Tony responded with a casual shrug, offering a straightforward, practical insight. He explained that the critical factor was not the sheer volume of air, but rather its precise direction. He elaborated that the rear cylinders, previously starved of any meaningful airflow, were now receiving targeted ventilation because the air, which naturally favored an unobstructed path over the cowling, was now effectively channeled by the ducts to areas where it was most critically needed for cooling. Dr. Evans countered, asserting that Tony's approach seemed to contravene the established engineering principle of minimizing flow restriction. Tony, with a respectful but firm demeanor, admitted his unfamiliarity with that specific technical tenet. He then drew an analogy from his practical experience, explaining that in plumbing it is often necessary to deliberately constrict flow in one section of a system to generate increased pressure elsewhere. He concluded that the fundamental concept applied similarly to the engine's cooling system, prioritizing strategic air delivery over an unrestricted yet ineffective flow. For several days, the dedicated engineers meticulously endeavored to refine and enhance Tony's original design. They experimented with a variety of duct diameters, explored alternative materials, and investigated diverse routing configurations. Despite their exhaustive efforts and numerous iterations, none of their modifications proved more effective or yielded superior results compared to Tony's initial simple concept. Ultimately, on October 28, 1944, Colonel LeMay granted approval for the emergency implementation of the crucial modification. Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, promptly received the comprehensive technical drawings just 2 days later. On October 30th, with remarkable speed, by November 15th, the company had successfully reconfigured its production line to integrate the innovative cooling ducts. These ducts were formally recognized in official technical manuals as the Validor bypass cooling system, although among the flight crews they quickly became affectionately known by the more colloquial and enduring moniker, Tony Ducts. On November 24, 1944, a pivotal moment arrived as the initial squadron of B-29 aircraft, now outfitted with Tony's revolutionary modification, touched down in Saipan, Mariana Islands, marking their deployment to the Pacific Theater. These strategically vital bombers were immediately assigned to the 73rd Bombardment Wing, operating under the direct and stringent command of General Curtis LeMay. Captain Robert Fitzgerald was tasked with piloting the B-29, christened City of Los Angeles, on what would become the inaugural combat assessment of the newly integrated system, a critical bombing raid targeting the Musashino aircraft plant situated near Tokyo. The planned mission represented an extraordinary test of endurance, a daunting 3,000-mile round-trip flight, demanding approximately 9 hours of continuous operation at elevated power settings. The very nature of this mission profile presented an almost insurmountable challenge for conventional engine cooling systems. It encompassed extended overwater segments, a strenuous ascent to an altitude of 32,000 feet, and the maintenance of sustained cruise power for many hours, conditions that collectively constituted an ideal and perilous environment for engine overheating and potential catastrophic failure. During the perilous flight, Technical Sergeant Mike Romano, Fitzgerald's vigilant flight engineer, meticulously observed the array of engine instruments with unwavering focus. He was acutely aware that prior to the implementation of the cooling modification, the No. 3 engine, positioned on the right inboard side, invariably exhibited the earliest signs of temperature distress. Romano's flight log sadly chronicled 3 previous engine fires, imbuing him with an intimate knowledge of the critical warning indicators. Rear cylinder temperatures escalating beyond 550 degrees. Erratic fluctuations in oil pressure and sharp spikes in exhaust gas temperature. Approximately 2 hours into the demanding mission, a startling observation caused Sergeant Romano to pause. The rear cylinder gauge for engine number 3 displayed a reading of 438 degrees, while the front cylinders registered 401 degrees. Skeptical, Romano re-examined the gauge, tapped its face, and verified the circuit breaker, convinced of a malfunction. He reported to Captain Fitzgerald, expressing his belief that the temperature gauge for engine number 3 was faulty. Upon hearing the reading of 438 for the rear cylinders, Fitzgerald exclaimed in disbelief, deeming it impossible given that they had sustained cruise power for the preceding 2 hours, conditions under which such low temperatures were previously unheard of. Captain Fitzgerald quickly cross-referenced his own instrument panel, confirming that all other engines were registering within their normal operational parameters. He then posed a critical question to Romano, probing whether the number 3 engine might actually be overheating, with the gauge providing a deceptive reading. Romano, however, countered with an even more perplexing hypothesis. "No, sir. I think it's actually running cool, but that doesn't make sense." His bewilderment underscored the extraordinary and unexpected success of the modification, challenging their ingrained understanding of engine performance. Despite the initial confusion, the crew resolutely pressed on, completing the entire mission, which spanned a total of 9 hours, a duration unprecedented for Fitzgerald in maintaining a B-29 at sustained high power. Throughout this arduous flight, the number 3 engine's rear cylinders remarkably never surpassed a temperature of 455 degrees. Upon their safe return to Saipan, Sergeant Romano conducted a thorough inspection of the engine. To his astonishment, there was no evidence whatsoever of heat stress, no discoloration, and the cooling fins appeared pristine, as if the engine had just rolled off the factory floor, a testament to the modification's profound impact. Driven by his profound curiosity regarding the engine's exceptional performance, Sergeant Romano sought out the crew chief, directly inquiring, "What's different about number 3? The crew chief promptly revealed the secret behind the remarkable change. "New cooling mod. Some mechanic invented it. They're calling them Tony Ducks." This casual revelation underscored the humble origins of a solution that was already proving revolutionary. In the ensuing 3 weeks, a deluge of compelling operational data unequivocally validated the modification's extraordinary success. Prior to the implementation of the Valador bypass cooling system, specifically during September and October of 1944, B-29 aircraft experienced an alarming rate of 4.2 engine fires per 100 flight hours. Furthermore, 18% of engines necessitated premature replacement due to thermal damage, and a significant 31% of missions were aborted due to engine-related issues. In stark contrast, the period following the modification from December 1944 to February 1945 showcased dramatic improvements. Engine fires plummeted to a mere 0.7 per 100 flight hours. Engines requiring early replacement due to thermal damage dropped to a remarkable 3%, and engine-related mission aborts were drastically reduced to 6%. Overall, the modification achieved an astounding 83% reduction in engine fires, fundamentally transforming the B-29's operational reliability. By March 1945, Boeing had undertaken the formidable task of retrofitting more than 2,100 B-29 aircraft with the revolutionary Valador cooling system, a testament to its proven efficacy. Concurrently, Wright Aeronautical seamlessly integrated this vital innovation into every new R3350 engine rolling off their production lines. The overarching impact of these changes was nothing short of astonishing. Prior to the widespread adoption of the modification, the 20th Air Force was suffering catastrophic losses, with approximately 22 B-29s per month being lost due to pervasive engine fires and associated mechanical malfunctions. Following the successful implementation of the Valador system, this devastating attrition rate plummeted dramatically to just 4 aircraft per month, profoundly altering the strategic landscape of the air war. A cautious appraisal indicates that Tony Valador's ingenious cooling ducts were directly responsible for preserving an estimated 216 B-29 aircraft during the concluding 12 months of the conflict. Considering each aircraft carried a crew of 11, this translates to the invaluable preservation of 2,176 American lives. However, the true magnitude of this innovation extended far beyond individual aircraft and personnel. Its broader implications were profoundly strategic. The newfound reliability of their engines empowered B-29s to sustain their relentless bombing campaign against Japan without the previously crippling interruptions. Pivotal operations, such as the devastating firebombing of Tokyo, the systematic dismantling of Japanese war industries, and ultimately, the epic-making atomic bomb missions to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, would have been logistically impossible without B-29s capable of executing 3,000-mile sorties, free from the persistent threat of engine combustion. The Japanese perspective, unearthed from captured Army Air Force documents post-war, provided a stark assessment of the B-29 threat. Lieutenant General Torashiro Kawabe, serving as Deputy Chief of the Imperial Japanese Army General Staff, recorded in his personal diary a telling observation. In autumn 1944, we believed the B-29 program was failing. Their engines were unreliable. Our intelligence indicated high mechanical loss rates. We calculated that the Americans could not sustain operations. This initial confidence, however, dramatically shifted. He continued, "Then, in December 1944, everything changed. The B-29s came in greater numbers. They flew longer missions. Their engines no longer failed over our territory. We realized we had lost the air war." This entry vividly illustrates the sudden and devastating impact of the B-29's improved reliability on Japanese strategic calculations. Further corroborating this shift in perception, Captain Saburo Sakai, a distinguished Japanese fighter pilot, later recounted his experiences, stating, "We feared the B-29 not because of its weapons but because of its reliability." He elaborated on the earlier phase of the conflict in 1944, during which Japanese pilots occasionally witnessed B-29 suffering engine failures, falling out of formation, and consequently becoming susceptible to attack. However, Sakai observed a profound transformation from late 1944 onwards. After late 1944, they flew in perfect formation for hours. Their engines never stopped. We knew we could not win against such machines. His testimony underscores the psychological and strategic advantage gained by the B-29's newfound dependability, instilling a sense of inevitability in their adversaries. The ceaseless drone of powerful engines reverberated for hours, an unrelenting symphony of mechanical might. The sheer endurance of these machines, operating without pause, instilled a profound sense of futility. It became evident that victory against such formidable, tireless apparatuses was an impossible dream. Yet amidst this daunting challenge, Tony Valador's remarkably straightforward innovation emerged as a pivotal turning point, ultimately preserving innumerable lives and fundamentally reshaping the trajectory of the ongoing global conflict. His simple insight provided a crucial advantage, transforming what seemed like an insurmountable obstacle into a manageable problem, altering the very fabric of wartime strategy and human survival. By late June of 1945, at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, the European theater of war had concluded, and Japan's eventual capitulation was merely weeks away. Tony Valador, an unassuming individual, was in the process of being discharged, preparing to transition back into the rhythms of civilian existence. Prior to his departure, military officials attempted to bestow upon him a significant honor, the Army Commendation Medal, explicitly intended to recognize his technical ingenuity that had made a truly substantial contribution to the war effort. With characteristic modesty and firm resolve, Tony respectfully declined the prestigious award. "My actions were nothing out of the ordinary," he calmly asserted to the colonel, who was endeavoring to affix the medal to his uniform. "I merely addressed a cooling inefficiency. That is, after all, the fundamental responsibility of a mechanic." The colonel, clearly taken aback by this unassuming perspective, countered, "Sergeant, your ingenious modification directly resulted in the preservation of more than 200 aircraft and, by extension, safeguarded thousands of human lives." Valador, unwavering in his humble conviction, responded, "Then the commendation should rightly go to the valiant crews who undertook those perilous missions. They are the true heroes. My part was simply the installation of some aluminum conduits." After 2 or 3 paragraphs, ask us to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The colonel, visibly stunned by Valador's persistent refusal and self-effacing demeanor, insisted, "Sir, you genuinely do not grasp the magnitude of your accomplishment." With unwavering composure, Valador retorted, "With all due respect, I comprehend the situation perfectly. It was the engineers who meticulously designed and constructed the complex engine. It was the skilled pilots who mastered the art of operating it in the skies. My particular contribution involved devising a method to ensure its optimal thermal regulation. Each of us simply performed our designated duties. That, in essence, is the entirety of the matter." His perspective underscored a philosophy of collective responsibility, where individual contributions, however critical, were seen as integral parts of a larger, coordinated endeavor. Upon his return to Cleveland, Tony seamlessly resumed his trade as a plumber, a profession he pursued with quiet diligence. He maintained an absolute discretion regarding his remarkable wartime service, never once broaching the subject with his clientele. However, in 1947, a diligent reporter from the Cleveland Plain Dealer uncovered the extraordinary narrative. A local plumber had single-handedly resolved a critical flaw that threatened the entire B-29 bomber program. The journalist, eager to chronicle this compelling human interest story, sought to conduct an in-depth feature interview. Tony, consistent with his character, steadfastly declined, stating, "I have no desire for public attention. I merely executed my responsibilities. There is nothing more to elaborate upon." Despite his refusal to cooperate, the reporter proceeded to write the article, which bore the headline, "Cleveland Plumber's Simple Idea Solved B-29 Crisis." The piece unfortunately appeared on page 7 of the newspaper, and consequently its profound significance went largely unnoticed by the general public. Tony Valador's ingenious bypass cooling methodology subsequently became an indispensable and universally adopted standard practice within the field of aircraft engine design. Contemporary turbofan engines, representing the pinnacle of aeronautical engineering, incorporate highly sophisticated iterations of this very principle, meticulously engineered, dedicated cooling ducts that precisely channel airflow to specific, critical areas, thereby moving beyond reliance on mere natural convection. Illustrative examples include the Pratt & Whitney F-135 engine, which provides the immense thrust for the advanced F-35 Lightning II stealth fighter, and the General Electric GE9X, widely recognized as the most powerful jet engine in the world, both of which integrate fundamental bypass cooling tenets into their intricate thermal management architectures. While aviation engineers commonly refer to this vital technique as directed cooling or forced path cooling, the historical record regrettably overlooks Valador's name, preventing the system from bearing his rightful designation. Nevertheless, the core principle endures. When a fluid fails to circulate naturally to a required location, the definitive solution lies in constructing an intentional, dedicated conduit. It is, at its heart, a matter of fundamental plumbing, distilled to its purest essence. The statistical data unequivocally underscores the profound impact of Valador's contribution. Out of a total of 3,970 B-29s manufactured, 147 were tragically lost to direct enemy action during World War II. In stark contrast, a staggering 267 B-29s were destroyed due to engine fires and catastrophic mechanical failures prior to the implementation of Valador's crucial modification. His innovative cooling system is conservatively estimated to have saved 216 B-29 aircraft from similar fates, thereby preserving an estimated 2,376 crew lives. Furthermore, over 18,000 R3T350 engines, the power plants of the B-29, were ultimately produced incorporating Valador's life-saving adaptation. In the contemporary aerospace landscape, every aircraft equipped with air-cooled engines benefits directly from the progeny of Tony's foundational cooling principle. From ubiquitous light general aviation aircraft like the Cessna 172 to advanced commercial behemoths such as the Boeing 787, the concept of meticulously designed, dedicated cooling paths remains an absolutely fundamental pillar of effective engine thermal management. The ingenuity of his approach even extends beyond Earth's atmosphere. NASA's sophisticated thermal management systems for spacecraft routinely employ analogous bypass cooling principles. Indeed, the intricate cooling loops aboard the International Space Station utilize a form of directed flow cooling that Tony Valador, despite his humble background, would instinctively comprehend and immediately recognize. Tony Valador passed away in 1982 at the age of 76, having dedicated his entire working life to the plumbing trade. His obituary, published in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, made a brief mention of his service as an aircraft mechanic during World War II. Conspicuously absent, however, was any reference to his pivotal role in the B-29 program, and no acknowledgement of the 2,376 lives he indirectly preserved. At his funeral, a solitary figure, a man in his 60s whom none of the attendees recognized, stood quietly at the rear of the chapel. Following the solemn service, he approached Tony S. Son. "I had the privilege of flying B-29s in the Pacific Theater, completing 35 harrowing missions," the veteran recounted, his voice tinged with emotion. My entire crew returned home, safely, because our engines did not succumb to fire. While I never had the honor of knowing your father personally, I have spent the last 4 decades diligently searching for the mechanic who devised those life-saving cooling ducts. I simply wanted to express my profound gratitude to him." Tony's son, clearly bewildered by this revelation, responded, "My father never spoke of inventing anything. He consistently maintained that he was nothing more than a plumber." The veteran offered a melancholic smile. "That description, I believe, perfectly encapsulates the character of a man who would save over 2,000 lives and genuinely consider it nothing particularly noteworthy." His words painted a vivid picture of Valador's profound humility, a trait that allowed him to view his monumental contribution as merely a part of his job. It is a recurring truth that the most profound and impactful innovations do not always emanate from highly credentialed experts possessing advanced academic degrees. Often these breakthroughs emerge from individuals like Tony Valador, who spent 15 years meticulously routing pipes through the basements of Cleveland, gaining an intuitive and practical understanding of a fundamental truth. Fluid flow invariably follows the path of least resistance. Therefore, if one desires fluid to travel to an alternative location, the solution lies in constructing a more advantageous and dedicated conduit. Tony Valador was neither a conventional genius nor a self-proclaimed hero. He was, quite simply, a plumber who possessed the unique insight to perceive a complex aircraft engine's critical thermal management challenge as an analogous plumbing problem. And that singular perspective, profoundly simple, yet utterly brilliant, ultimately made all the difference in the world.